So he goes, so one day, I didn't tell this story in the other ones. It just came to my mind. So you guys are getting a good thing here.
Bonus stuff.
Yeah, bonus stuff. So he brought the ready. So he goes, so one day, I didn't tell this story in the other ones. It just came to my mind. So you guys are getting a good thing here.
Bonus stuff.
Yeah, bonus stuff. So he brought the who's who of the UFC at the time in the training camp. There was Randy Couture, Randy the Natural Couture, Brandon Vera, Quinn Rampage Jackson, Tito Ortiz, Frank Trigg.
Hulk Hogan.
No? With all his Hulkamaniacs.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And then there was James Irvin, Scott Smith, like the who's who of the UFC at the time. And they, you know, Hulk Hogan ended up saying, I'm not going to spar you guys. But anyways, no, just kidding. But so all these guys were there. There was 9 guys in the gym, right? And I get there, and Uriah's like, hey, man, if you can show some wrestling, that'd be great. I'm like, oh, yeah, for sure, I'm there. I'm going to show some wrestling, great. I show some wrestling, I end up loving it, and then Uriah comes in, all right, guys, time to spar. I'm like, hoo, this is going to be awesome, right? There was 9 guys in the gym. 9. An odd number, right? So I'm like, oh, man. So everyone gets a partner. One guy doesn't have a partner. He walks into this cage. I'm like, man, who's going to walk in with Randy Couture? Man, he's a reigning world champion. He's going to fight Tim Sylvia to defend his belt. So I'm like, man, who's going to walk in with him? I can't wait to watch this. I'm ready to get my popcorn and my soda. I'm like, man, this is great, right? Then Uriah comes up. He's like, hey, bro, can you do me a favor? I'm like, and he has a pair of shin guards, a headgear, and a pair of gloves. I'm like, no, I am not going to walk in there with the UFC reigning world champion. No. I'm not doing that, man. I got a wife and kids, man. I need to stay alive. Like, I need to be alive, man. I need all my faculties, man. I'm good. He goes, bro, please. He needs, just wrestle him. You can throw some punches, but wrestle him. I'm like, no, man, I'm good. So I'm like, all right. So long story short, I ended up putting on the gloves, putting on the headgear, which the headgear was like this big. Now, I could have sworn it was this big, right? And I'm like, man, how do people use this, man? I can't even bend my head, And I put on my shin guards, and I'm like, hey, and they didn't feel right. And I was walking around, I'm like, you're right, these don't feel right. And he was like, hey, bro, you put them on backwards, man. They're backwards. You gotta put them on right. I'm like, oh, man, this is crazy, right? So I see Randy Couture, because there's steps to go up the cage, and I see him in the corner, like bouncing up and down, doing this stuff, shadow boxing, doing this, like doing this. I'm like, man, am I supposed to do that? Like, I don't even know how to do that yet. Man, that's crazy, right? And Uriah's like, all right, guys, time to spar. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And I'm walking into this cage. This cage, I walk up the steps, and they take the pin out. They open up the cage, they close the cage, and they put the pin in. Ding! And I'm like, oh my gosh. I am locked into this cage. Are we animals? Like, we're not animals. Oh my gosh. Like, and he's jumping up and down, like, looking at me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is really real. So Uriah's like, all right, guys, time to spar. I'm like, oh, my goodness. So your sympathetic nervous system is responsible for 2 things, fight or what? Flight. I didn't have wings on me, so I couldn't fly out of that cage. So I'm like, okay, it got real. So I'm like swinging for the fences. And they're like, all right, fight. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get him. So I'm swinging like this, like I'm swinging for the fences. And he's dodging it, like, punching me, and he's like clinching me and putting me against the cage. Finally, and then I hear Uriah, double jab, double leg. And I'm like, what is a double jab? So I'm like, I tell him double jab, and I'm like, doing this stuff, right? He's like, no, straighten it out. Keep your head down, keep your head up. I'm like, head down, head up. What are you talking about? And I'm going in there. He's actually coaching me, because the cage was up, and coaching me in the corner. I'm like, oh man, this is crazy. Why am I doing this, right? So then I missed my double jab, double leg the first time, like exactly what I showed you guys, right? Again, against Pastor Rusty. And I missed it the second time. And I saw his back against the cage. I'm like, oh, here's my golden opportunity. So third time's the charm. So I rush him. He's like, straighten out your jab. And I'm like, I'm like, yeah. And then I grab his legs and I lock my hands around his legs. And when I have my hands locked around somebody's legs, I feel really good. And I felt really good. Yeah. So I'm like, oh my gosh. I got my hands locked around Randy Couture's legs. Somebody give him a mouthpiece and a headgear because he's going for a ride, right? So I picked him up and I slammed him, boom. And there was a party going on in my body. I was like, oh yeah, this is crazy. And then your eyes like, ground and pound. I'm like, ground and pound. So in my mind, I'm thinking about Donkey Kong, right? Like smashing the barrels. And I'm like, ooh, boom, ooh, boom, ooh, boom. And I'm like raining punches from the heavens, right? And Randy looks up at me and goes, hey, we don't actually try to knock each other out in practice. I got to fight in 3 weeks, man. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought that's what we were supposed to be doing, and then, he got so mad. He gets up, spins me against the cage, foot sweeps me, and elbows me in the chest. I'm like, wait, hold on. I thought we weren't supposed to do this stuff, right? Long story short, I ended up having the time of my life. He sat me down and says, hey, you really need to consider doing mixed martial arts because you're a natural. I'm like, what? No, wait, you're the natural. I can't do that. I can't take your name, man. He goes, no, you're a natural. I'm like, oh, okay. That's his nickname, by the way. So, so I ended up getting into it. And then 9 months of training, I ended up getting my first professional fight. I skipped amateur altogether and went straight to pro and then got into the UFC after 11 months. Yeah, so it was crazy. Yeah, it was a bit of a ride. Yeah.